Good evening. I'm Eric Bierbaum, Associate Professor of Government and Social Studies and Director of Graduate Studies at the Salfer Center for Ethics, and it's my pleasure to introduce Henry Richardson, Professor of Philosophy at Georgetown University, who holds several degrees here, the MPP, the JD, and the PhD, where he studied with Martha Nussbaum and John Rawls. He's currently editor of the journal Ethics and author of Practical Reasoning about Final Ends and Democratic Autonomy, a book that proposes an account of deep compromise that has been a source of engagement for many of the grad students in my department. His work was incubated here, like many past lecturers in the fellowship program in Ethics in the Professions, 88 and 89, although he reports it was an off-site location. He has twice been a visiting scholar at the Department of Bioethics at the National Institute of Health, and he's taught research ethics courses organized by the NIH in Uganda and Tanzania. Now, as a Rockefeller visiting fellow at Princeton University's Center for Human Values, he's working on a book entitled Articulating the Moral Community, and we're going to get a preview, I think, of part of that book today. Now, I should tell you, Professor Richardson was supposed to have given this lecture almost precisely a year ago, but he gave one of the best excuses we've ever heard, and that was that the president called, well, duty called at least. After being vetted by the White House, he became a member of the World Commission on Ethics and Scientific Knowledge and Technology. So you passed the vetting with flying colors, I assume.
Said I would show up. That was
right, exactly, showing up. Of course, many of you know that there is political involvement deeply in Professor Richardson's blood. His father, Elliot Richardson, served in 3 executive branch posts in a single year, and in a remarkable act of moral disengagement, famously resigned as Attorney General. So we've had a year's wait, and that's plenty. Hopefully it's driven up a lot of anticipation. So with no further ado, Professor Richardson's going to talk about moral entanglements in medical research, other professions, and everyday life. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. So I have this mic here that works by itself, does it? So it's a pleasure to be back, certainly at Harvard, and back at Harvard Law School. I guess I'm told that's where I am. This is so brand new, and I mean it has the format. It's familiar, and it's great to see friends here. And I had expected the audience would be diverse, and I'm going to give a talk that I hope will appeal to the philosophers who are here, and also to the people who are working in practical ethics. And there may be some who are interested in medical research in particular, which is what I'm going to be using as my main case study. Yeah, so this is, well, so this would have, if I'd come a year ago, this would have been a future book. This is now, the book is now out, but I don't expect anybody's read it yet. So, and the book is focused on the medical research ethics case, but I also, partly speaking to the philosophers today, want to speak more broadly about the category of moral entanglements, partly because I think it's just a fascinating category, and I want to entice more people to work on it. So I'll explain the category first and give a range of illustrations, and then I'll switch gears and go into the case about medical researchers' ancillary care obligations, which I'll explain what they are, and I've got a view about those obligations, which needs to be explained and justified, and that brings me back around to the moral entanglements idea. And I want to introduce the moral entanglements idea by comparing and contrasting with promises, which are, lots of, well, of course, philosophers are capable of making most anything seem mysterious when they put their minds to it, or capable of being mystified by most anything. But here's Hume on promises. Since every new promise imposes a new obligation of morality on the person who promises, and since this new obligation arises from his will, 'tis one of the most mysterious and incomprehensible operations that can possibly be imagined, and may even be compared to transubstantiation or holy orders, where a certain form of words, along with a certain intention, changes entirely the nature of an external object, and even of a human creature. I mean, I teach at Georgetown, the Catholic Jesuit universities, and say, you know what transubstantiation is, right? Where the hose changes to the essence of the body of Christ. Yeah, it's a mysterious thing, he's saying. And a quarter millennium later, Shauna Schifrin is echoing this thought, saying that promises are puzzling because they're cases in which the mere expression of an individual's will to alter her moral status can be effective in just the way she intends. And isn't that mysterious? And philosophers are continuing to argue about the basis of promissory obligation, some saying that, as Hume thought, the basis of promissory obligation is conventional. And then there are people like Tim Scanlon who argue, no, no, no. We properly understand the obligation involved. It's a non-conventional basis. And then there's a hybrid view out there, Collodi and Wallace arguing that neither of those two simple views is adequate, and we need to put them together in a certain way to get an adequate understanding. So they're mysterious, and there's still people fighting over trying to understand the basis of promissory obligation. Well, I want to say that moral entanglements are mysterious, and they're not studied, and they should be. So by moral entanglement in general, I'm thinking of a moral obligation, so an obligation to somebody, in this case, a special obligation that arises unintendedly by parties who are transacting with one another in a completely innocent way. I say completely innocent because we understand, well, maybe, I guess we understand, maybe philosophers would make this mysterious too, but we understand easily enough if you hurt somebody in a transaction, you've got to compensate them, make amends, pay damages, whatever. But, but take a pair of people interacting voluntarily and consensually, and there's nothing wrong with the transaction. Still, my suggestion is unintended special obligations can arise from it. And so these would be at least as mysterious as promises because there are special obligations arising despite not being willed, and often in the absence of any convention to the effect that there is any such obligation arising. Sometimes there might be a supporting convention, but often I claim these obligations arise without that. And I think when you think about it, the phenomena are very familiar. It's just that the category hasn't been thematized. So you get a double effect if this is it. There's a tremendous range of moral entanglements defined as I've defined them. And I feel like I've only been able to sort of start to think about the range. I'm sure there are categories I haven't thought of. And then you'll see there's one corner of that range that I've explored in any thoroughness. But I want to give you a sense of the range that I think is involved here. Again, of many familiar phenomena. So here's a phenomenon that Barbara Herman noticed in one of her essays, the open-endedness of helping. So example would be giving directions to a clueless person, ask you, could you please give me directions tell me how to find the campsite down valley so that I can camp there for the night. And you happen to know this person just hasn't been paying attention to the weather reports to know that the down valley is all sodden with rain, and they're going to, get totally wet if they go down valley. And they shouldn't go down valley, and you should take the time not just to give them directions, which is perfectly ordinary, and I don't know if one feels obligated to give directions, but it's sort of rude or something like that not to give directions. But then once you started to give, you said, sure, I'll give you directions, and you paused or you stopped your car, whatever it is, and then it's going to be more complicated because they're so clueless. It's okay, it's trivial, it's not a serious one. I'll get to more serious cases later, but it's a case of, because of their cluelessness, it's just hard to back off and say, forget you, or you could just, you could stop, you could give them the directions. Okay, you could literally do what they asked, but that's to do them a disfavor. Another sort of case would be, so a lot of cases it's sort of following through on help. So you're going across the bridge in the middle of the night, deserted area, and you see somebody just ahead of you jump off the bridge, clearly in a suicide attempt, but you dive in and you pull them out of the water, and then no one else is about, and maybe you can tell the person is not jumping up and trying to do it again, but on the other hand, they're very vulnerable in a terrible state, and what are you going to do? Just leave? I mean, so there comes to be some moral pressure on you to do more, and to help them more, to get them to the authorities or a place where they can settle down or get warm or something, by way of follow-through. Some of these moral entanglements, we'll understand easily enough in terms of very familiar categories of moral significance, like that of friendship. And so some of these we could see as the beginnings of friendship on the way, although the case of helping the suicide is not one of those. But here's a case that I guess is like that from the book and the movie The Soloist. It was a true story of LA Times reporter Steve Lopez, who, well, the way that the story is set up, he's just had a terrible bike accident, and so he meets this homeless person in a park. I guess the thing is, if it's set in LA, you have to give a special explanation of why he's walking in a park, because otherwise he'd be in his car, right? So he's walking in a park, and he here's this guy playing the violin beautifully in the park. And he's a reporter, and he writes this up in his column. And as a result of his column, somebody donates a cello, quite a fine cello for the guy. He brings them the cello, writes about it again, and then comes back and finds the guy playing the cello. Well, in the movie, he's playing the cello in a highway underpass, very dangerous, cars whizzing by. But he sees the guy is doing this in a terrible, dangerous place, and so he says, oh, no, that won't do. So he says, come on, Nathaniel's the name of the musician, let's store the cello in a homeless shelter here, and then it'll be safe and it'll be dry, and maybe you don't want to be there, but it'll be there. And then the guy starts playing concerts for the people in the shelter, and Lopez is drawn into doing even more things for him, getting him an apartment and so on. Now, I'm not even got a clear view myself of which of those steps were morally obligated on his part, but I'm suggesting that in this kind of interaction, some of them can become morally obligatory when you get entangled with someone like that, and then it's sort of puzzling to think about why. And one way to think about it, in this case, well, nascent friendship maybe, but he was writing about him too, so there was a level of potential exploitation. He was using the guy's story in the column, so it wasn't a pure friendship. And then here's one close to home for many of us: is you've interacted with somebody in conferences, and you've given some comments on papers, and you think the person has a crazy view, but you give your criticism in a hopefully constructive way, and then the person asks you, will you write a recommendation letter? And again, may not be a great case for moral obligation, but it's a case where the question will arise: do you owe it to him, or is it something you morally ought to do to write the letter? A case where maybe we have conventions about that as academics, but if we do, they're very vague as to what their dictates are. One thing that's going to be very important as I go along is to distinguish these special obligations that arise from moral entanglement from the general duty of rescue. So I think we do have a duty of rescue, which, as distinct from the psychological phenomena of rescue I was talking about with Nir earlier today, but the duty of rescue, as philosophers talk about it, is thought of as a duty to take relatively low-cost or easy steps to avert serious harm. So it's a duty, and the now hackneyed example is the example of walking by a pond where a kid is drowning. It's a general duty because it's a duty incumbent on anybody who's so related to a kid who's drowning. So it's not a special duty. Whereas the moral entanglements are special duties because they're arising from a transaction with somebody. So there's a historical basis to it. Because only if you've had this history with this person will you end up with a moral entanglement. And my suggestion is that often it's going to require more than this duty of rescue is, because the duty of rescue is relatively minimal. So as I said, I think there's a wide range types of moral entanglement. I think they're much more, well, I think they're very familiar, even though, again, the philosophers haven't thematized them. And as I said, there's one corner of this domain that I've tried to think about carefully, and that's this area of privacy-based moral entanglement. And let me set that up with the story of the old woman in the grocery. So the story in this case is you're walking along the street, you see an old woman struggling with her grocery bags, clearly having a hard time, and you say, "Can I help you with those bags?" She says, "That would be lovely, my apartment's just around the corner." As you're walking along, you sort of glean some information about her. You know that she's clearly struggling in various respects, clearly has terrible eyesight, real hard hearing, just sort of getting old. And get to her house. She says, "Look, I just live in the first floor apartment here. Would you mind bringing these into the kitchen for me?" And you bring them in, and you see the kitchen is a mess. It's a counters piled up with dirty dishes, food scraps all over them, and growing huge clouds of black mold all over. And clearly a potential health risk to her, which it seems like, as you can tell, she hasn't been able to perceive because she can't see well enough and clearly can't smell. So, I guess almost all of us lose the sense of smell pretty before other things go. And so you face the question now, what to do about it? But the baseline question is, do you owe her anything? Do anything about this danger that you perceive? And it's presumably not to stop and simply clean up all the dishes, but maybe something. Tell you better do that, or you notice how dangerous this is, and then you got to try to do it tactfully, but maybe you want to do something. And so the features in these, I call this a privacy-based case, and I didn't say why I'm taking it that way, but the reason I'm taking it that way is, well, so you're helping her already, but you accepted a privacy waiver in that there is a basic privacy right that pertains to the home. But she's invited you in, and you said fine. And it was because of accepting the privacy waiver in a completely implicit or tacit way that you gained access to this information about what her kitchen was like. And somehow, in some mysterious way, way that we would have to understand, you've gotten in deeper in your moral connection to her situation. That I want to work on. I say go for it, is the getting in deeper. One thing we can see, though, I think already, is that there is this version of the duty of rescue, the general duty, something like that, that comes in at this early point to block your simply being silent about it. Because the very least you can do is warn her, say, "Look, that looks dangerous," and then walk away. So a general duty of rescue might require that. That's easy, and it looks like it might avert serious harm. So you should go ahead and do that, but maybe the question of entanglement is maybe you ought to do more. So let me give you some other examples of privacy-based moral entanglements before I go to the main case. Because again, I think these are quite pervasive. So the case of the tax accountant and the gambling addict is somebody's doing somebody's taxes and notices these oddly paired transactions where there's a sudden liquidation of stocks and bonds, immediately followed by equal-sized payment to Foxwoods Casino. Uh-oh, gambling addiction. Notice that. It's no part of the accountant's job to deal with gambling addiction, but maybe the person should think about, does he need? I'm slating it as a question. I don't know the answer to the question. The question of the moral entanglement there would be, should the accountant have some kind of serious talking to with the client about the gambling addiction? Maybe just from the point of view of the portfolio. Say, look, this is doing terrible things to your portfolio. Have you consulted anybody about this? Even going that far, it's awkward, and one wouldn't do unless perhaps obligated. Sorry, I think I didn't again make it explicit, but the access to the financial waiver is something right, not accessible to everyone. The accountant did accept a privacy waiver with respect to those, and reporters are very often delving into people's affairs and finding out things about them. So an example relatively dire would be a reporter going around Laos doing a story on a Mekong River dam project and finding a peasant who was living in the area that the dam was going to inundate, but apparently completely unaware that there was a relocation program that would help him get out of the area and move to a nice place with equivalent land somewhere else. And so, should the reporter do anything about that? Should the reporter, well, tell him? Maybe that's what the duty of the warning would require. Should the reporter think about going back to the provincial capital and helping put the guy in touch with the relevant bureaucrats or anything like that? He's found out about this dire situation. What should he do about it? And then an area that's where mutual acceptance of privacy waivers is central and essential is sexual encounters. You take a casual, mutually consensual sexual encounter where you see that your partner's back is covered with welts, has been hit. So what do you do about that? I mean, you try to intervene there and say, who's abusing you? We've got to put a stop to this, or can I help you? You can get some counseling for that, or anything of the sort. Okay. So those were a bunch of illustrative examples just to give you a sense of the broader territory. Now I come to a more practically serious, practically important case that first I'm just going to go into it on its own right, and then I'll come back more towards the end, as I say, to how to see it as a case of a moral entanglement. So again, I hope at least to have gotten the philosophers intrigued about the idea of moral entanglements, these special obligations that might arise despite not being intended, and despite there being no supporting convention that would suggest that there is one. Maybe you don't yet believe that there are such things, although the open-endedness of helping, I think, is the most familiar. And in this case, a case of the medical research obligations that I had in mind, I want to convince you that they're practically serious and important obligations at stake. So the ancillary care issue is an issue that I stumbled into about 8 years ago. Nothing had been done on this issue. There is no, till this date, there's still no authoritative guidance on it whatsoever, even though most of medical research is subject to authoritative regulatory-based guidance. But this issue has just been neglected, and this is, now the book is out, and the thesis of it is that the basis of the ancillary care obligation is privacy-based moral entanglement. So what is ancillary care? And so ancillary care is care that your research subjects need, but that you don't need to provide in order to do the science soundly. So it's no part of the sound scientific design of study, nor do you need to do it safely. And if I'm spelling it out more fully, you don't need to do it to compensate for research-induced harm either. So it's care for things, first cut description of it is to say it's, or a rough description is to say it's care that's unrelated to the study, but that's a little bit too gross. So what I have on the slide is a little bit more exact. And this is something that researchers in the field, it's funny that the issue hadn't come to the attention of medical research ethics people, because the researchers had been encountering it in the field all the time and having to deal with it by the seat of their pants. So you have somebody who's studying malaria in rural Africa, in this case Mozambique, and in an area where there are no other medical people around. You might be having some very specific interest in malaria, something about the immunology of malaria focused on one protein, and you're drawing blood and bodily fluids, and you're looking at the blood and bodily fluids in the microscope, or whatever you're looking at it with these days, and you discover other parasitical diseases that the person has, like schistosomiasis, which is another debilitating parasitical disease. And the question is, what ought you do about that? And the amazing thing was, again, or is, that there's no authoritative guidance on what you ought to do about that. So parenthetically, actually, the U.S. National Institutes of Health has a rule, it's an Inspector General's rule, that says no study funds are to be used for non-study related care. And so that's been a barrier for these researchers who then do workarounds. So the NIH-funded researchers tend to do things like build clinics instead of, that's where the money goes, and that facilitates the giving of care to people. The reason, I don't know if people know the reason why that Inspector General rule got put in place. It was put in place to block congressional spouses from going to Bethesda for free first-class medical care. So that is a case of unintended consequences of the rule. But anyway, so this would be pervasive. You could have really tough cases arising. You're doing a study of extremely drug-resistant tuberculosis in South Africa, and you're going to find lots of people with HIV. What do you do about that? And then it's important, and so the most dramatic cases of ancillary care needs are going to arise in these developing country settings where there's a dearth of medical resources. And in countries like the US, or better, countries like Western Europe, you can say, we'll just send you to the specialist down the hall. But even in these top hospitals in the US or Europe, there are going to be serious ancillary care questions that arise. Of course, in the US, we have plenty of uninsured people. Hopefully that's going to get better. So we have, I mean, I know I see philosophers in the room who know that they may not like it, but they know that there are philosophers doing functional brain scan studies. I don't know if we have any fans of that work here, but I see some non-fans. Anyway, but it's being done, and it's being done with philosophers, as investigators, and putting people in brain scans. And you can have even the philosophers getting to know the brain. We'll see some funny-looking blobs, and well, of course, you don't want philosophers telling the research subject that you've got a funny-looking blob in the brain, and so there's serious worry about false positives there. And what NIH has decided to do about these functional brain scan studies is to just have a general rule that if, for anybody who goes in for a brain scan study, they get a diagnostic quality scan with a diagnostician reading it. So that something is done, in effect, to deal with the ancillary things that might be found, but in a way that avoids the false positive problem. So it's a little bit anticipatory, this, but it's still a way of dealing with ancillary care within this very high-tech, highly resourced setting. And it's not that rare that there will be people who need this kind of follow-up. And then final just example is HIV vaccine trials. And I mention it because it was the case that really got this issue rolling. So the issue fell into my lap when I was a visiting scholar at NIH. But it fell into my lap because people at the bioethics department there had been thinking about it because of an issue that had arisen internal to NIH, which was starting at the time to plan these large-scale vaccine trials for HIV in Africa. Have to do it in Africa because you've got a different strain of the virus in Africa. And you need to have 10,000 people enrolled, large number of people. They need to be people fairly high risk of becoming HIV positive. You're looking to see if your trial vaccine makes a difference as to whether they become HIV positive. And then the way the science is set up, somebody becomes HIV positive, then that's sort of the end of the study as far as they're concerned. But what then? Do you just say goodbye and say, thank you for your participation and leave it at that? And the people at NIH wanted to be able to commit themselves to giving lifetime antiretrovirals to these people. Now, you've got to remember this was quite some time ago. The drugs were very expensive then, and the calculation then was if they did that, that would cost an amount of money equal to NIH's annual outlay for HIV research all put together. So they just not reasonable, can't do that. So that's why, anyway, the main reason is I know people were starting to think about this problem of ancillary care. What should the obligations be? So I guess I got to freely confess, because it's now there in the published record, I went at this backwards in that I first published a view on this. Well, I'm a reflective equilibrium person, so you've got to allow me to work backwards from time to time, I guess. So I first published a view, which is called the partial entrustment model for reasons I'll explain, that tries to take a reasonable position between extremes on this matter. And it was intended to capture the special obligation that researchers owe their participants or research subjects, which, as we talked to people, it certainly seemed to be the way the researchers were understanding the matter. So the polar positions, I mean, this came out partly just in talking to the researchers now, especially these privileged ones at NIH, where they don't have to worry so much about the budget. So their first response was, you give them these cases, say, oh, yes, we're doctors, we'll take care of it. And then you mention, tell them the HIV vaccine trial case, and they would flip the other way and say, oh, well, that's going to prevent us from doing the science. So they would see that going completely that way, assimilating the researchers to the personal position, ignores the fact that research has got this separate aim and is trying to generate generalizable knowledge. But they would also then flip-flop and go to the other side and say, oh, yes, we are physicians, but these are not our patients after all. They're our research subjects. That's different. And we don't owe them any special obligations. I don't want to do either of those things. Can I just, no, maybe I can't. Okay, which one I should choose? No, I don't know.
Restart the program.
Restart the program. And then I will just did I do anything?
No.
Okay.
Microsoft.
Yeah.
They're after layering on you.
He quit my class too. Bill Gates did. Sorry. Do I go to that slide?
Yeah, and then you can press this thing right then.
Nope. Fine when it goes fine, but I guess I should. Okay. So those two extreme positions seem morally unacceptable. The one that says, look, I don't owe anything, it's just going to be potentially cruel in some cases, and then, okay, concession to various people in the room, I I recognize that the idea of not treating people as mere means is really tough kind of idea to pin down, but there's something to it on the other hand, and if there's a case you're treating these people simply as sources of protein and ignoring their dire urgent needs puts you in danger of using them as mere means. So just schematically, the partial entrustment model takes a middle position suggesting that there are some ancillary care obligations that are limited in their scope and in their strength. And the scope dimension is going to be the crucial one as I go forward. And to see the transactional basis of it, it's important to see how this is rooted in a dimension of the informed consent process, which hasn't much been attended to, which is, in contrast with the ones that are so salient and have been so salient since the scandals like the Tuskegee scandal that got the regulatory structure going for medical research ethics. You have to have informed consent there as a watchdog to prevent abuses like that from happening again. And then there's the sort of more high-minded idea of promoting people's autonomy, so you want to put them in a position to make an autonomous choice. Something that you need to give, anyway, this whole rigmarole to do that. And then, but there's a more basic function of the informed consent process, if you think about it, which is crucial here, which is you need these people's permission to do these things you're proposing to do. And so you do need their consent in that simple sense of permission. Although crucial to the philosophical argument I'm going to get to is that you can't see it merely as permission. But it is giving permission to touch people, to examine their bodies, collect their bodily samples, and collect their medical history. And these are the kinds, these are what I mean by the privacy rights, these rights. So I'm not talking about rights with regard to collected information, so much as the rights to touch the body, to collect the samples, to collect the history. And of course, the researchers have accepted these waivers of privacy rights, and after all, they solicited them to begin with. So there is, we're in the territory, at least, of the privacy-based moral entanglement. And calling this an entrustment model, I'm not making any claim that there's any state of mind on the part of either party. I'm not claiming that either of them is thinking that they're doing any entrusting. Entrusting is constructive, as the lawyers, I think, say. So the scope, just again laying out the position, is that the ancillary care obligation is going to pertain to things that are unrelated to the study aims that you find out by carrying out study procedures, or anyway, there are things unrelated to the study aims and then explained by not related to soundness and safety, that you find out by carrying out the study procedures as opposed to other ways of finding it out. There's a separate strain in the medical research ethic literature, which then, as I see the ancillary care case, converges with this, which is arisen in discussing more high-tech procedures like virtual colonoscopies, which is sort of an attractive idea because you just get scanned, but the things you get scanned, this whole bunch of your abdomen gets scanned, and they find all this information about the lower abdomen, and there's a huge amount of other stuff that they see by the way, and then there's all in a twist about, what should they do about that. But it's, again, an ancillary care case. I'm just going to mention the strength side. I'm sorry to have this strength side because, as some of you know, well, actually going back to my early work as a fellow in the center, I've ended up being a foe of, FOE, of balancing. But I couldn't avoid a balancing test here. There's so many factors and you can't ignore them. So factors that seem to matter intuitively to the strength of the obligation, or how much difference would it make to somebody's well-being? How dependent are they on the research team for getting it? Do you owe the subjects any debt of gratitude for their participation? usually not, but sometimes they put themselves into some risk or some pain for the sake of science. And then there's a depth dimension, which I'll come back to, which is, again, a little bit mysterious or hard to get a handle on, but it's, so sometimes, so medical research is a hugely diverse area, and sometimes the study is just to go in and get a DNA swab and you're gone, and sometimes you've got an inpatient for 3 months. And so it's that kind of dimension of how intensely and how long you're interacting with the person as a predictable matter based on the protocol that I think seems to matter to the strength of the relationship. And countervailingly, of course, how much would it cost to provide? So I need to speed up a little bit. Go through. So for a long time, uncomfortably, I was the only person with a view out there on this matter, and thankfully now some people are starting to get some dialogue going. And I hope one thing this presentation may do may spur some more people to get in this area, because it is, as I say, still sort of untouched territory to a large extent. So Dickert and Wendler have objected to this scope restriction and say, look, the relationship is a sufficient basis, and you shouldn't distinguish between what you find out by carrying out study procedures and otherwise. And they give 2 examples of things that were found in a hypertension study, pulmonary hypertension study in Mali, this terrible eye infection, chlamydia trachomitis, which you can, a trained person, I guess, can apparently see with the naked eye. And something else you can see, a trained person can see with the naked eye, is osteomyelitis, a bone infection. And they say, I'm saying that's outside the scope. How can you leave these things out? And as I go towards a deeper answer to this objection is where I get to the meat of my moral entanglements explanation. And one first response to this objection is to say, look, I'm trying to isolate the special ancillary care obligation that's at play here. That is the one that is specially owed by the researchers to their participants. And I recognize there are other obligations that may be relevant to providing ancillary care, in particular the one I mentioned, rescue. Right, so some of these cases may be covered by rescue. The thing that's limited in scope, I'm saying, is the special obligation. And so it will come out something like this, that the chlamydia is apparently easily treatable. You're seeing it with the naked eye, so it's not within the scope, but it comes within the rescue since it's easily treatable. Some things will be covered by both, like the schistosomiasis that the malaria researcher finds. It's within the scope because it's found by carrying out study procedures, but it's also fairly easy to treat, so it could be covered by rescue. Either of those would be sufficient basis for saying they ought to treat it. And then something like the osteomyelitis, tragically though it may be, doesn't seem to be covered by either of these grounds of obligation because, as I understand it, it requires fairly, I mean, you can do the operation with a converted Dremel moto tool apparently, but it's an operation and the person needs some weeks of recovery and it's a little dicey and you need a fairly sterile operating room. So it's anyway not an easy rescue. And it's not within the scope either. Well, they say the relationship's the basis. That's just too vague. Too many types of relationships, as the story about Steve Lopez and the homeless guy illustrates. That's a relationship, but it's a very peculiar one. You have a relationship as a research team with waitresses at the cafe where you go every Friday, but that's not, that won't do it. But the objection does point to the need to deepen the partial entrustment model and deal with its specialness or the special obligation involved, which poses 2 challenges, which is why should you impose an extra burden on these researchers who, not always, but many of them, maybe the ones I'm talking about, are already helping people, even just by being there and providing them some modicum of medical care. And why should you, with this special obligation, favor those people who are already being helped? Because you may be in effect, if you're going to give them special access to HIV medication, for instance, you may be distorting what the impartial priorities would be in their country or their locality for getting those. So why depart from impartiality in those ways? And this is where moral entanglement comes back. And you have the factors that I flagged in the case of the old woman in the groceries. These people are already helping. They've accepted a privacy waiver. They're getting in deeper somehow, and there's a duty to warn that blocks the silence. And it's the getting deeper that I really then calls for explanation. Well, I'm not a reductive type, and I'm happy to give an explanation that draws on other moral obligations. In particular, I'm drawing on these three general obligations. A general obligation of beneficence, which I think of as one that's, well, as Kant says, has latitude, but in other words, it's open-ended and stands in need of specification in order to figure out what its practical implications are. The duty of warning, or duty to warn, as I explained, and the duty to respect privacy rights has been implicit in the background all along. So what happens when these special rights are waived? I've been focusing in on that aspect of the transaction and what's going on there. Well, a friend helped me see what's going on. And as I said, it's something other than mere permission. So take the analogy of borrowing somebody's car. You could see it as mere permission. You could say, I have exclusive right to use my car, and so he's got a duty not to use it unless I give permission. I give permission, then that's all there is. But I think there's more to it. When you lend somebody your car, they come to have some special responsibilities with regard to it. So if it gets dinged in a parking lot on their watch, maybe you want to deal with it. So the inside joke in my book is I gratefully thank Zeke Emanuel for this example. Zeke has been a tremendous supporter of my ability to work in this as a fellow or scholar in the program, in his program and so on. But in this case, his way of helping was by borrowing my car and then doing the decent thing about it. And of course, my insurance covered the cost, but he dealt with all the hassle of it. So there's some transfer of responsibility, I suggest. I'm not saying, I don't know, always I haven't tried to test that thesis, but often in these cases of waivers of rights. And then one needs to think about, well, what responsibilities get transferred when rights are waived? And my suggestion is, although I haven't tested it fully generally, my suggestion is responsibilities that deal with the purpose, central purpose of the right that's being waived. The property rights with regard to the car seem a little peculiar among privacy rights to me. I mean, they're especially regulated by the whole DMV structure, and seem partly to have to do with having a car that's safe to operate and roadworthy and so on. And so responsibilities would deal with that. In the case of the medical research, these privacy rights with regard to the body are quite distinctive. And as I would see them, and there are lots of different views about it, but sort of trying to synthesize them, would see them as dealing with protecting fragile aspects of autonomy. So here would be putting the picture together, and then I may wrap up there, probably the best thing to do. So these three general duties in the background. The transaction, crucially, is a waiving of the privacy rights. It's usually an accepted waiver of the privacy rights, which then gives the researchers special responsibility with regard to these fragile aspects of autonomy, which, so one of the fragile aspects of autonomy is having to do with our social presentation of self and how we think of ourselves and relate to others. And if you get an unexpected diagnosis of illness, that is the kind of thing that can threaten this. It will vary with the cases in terms of how much that's involved, but it can do. since that's the main purpose of the privacy rights, according to me, then the first line of response would be to try to just be very tactfully quiet about what you find out, because you don't want to mess with the person's self-conception. But in the cases we're talking about, that's negated by the duty to warn, which overrides the silence. That's not an option anymore. And so you're forced to an alternative way of carrying out the special responsibility, which is going to be, well, what's the alternative? It's to engage with the person in a tactful way. You still got to be tactful, but engage in a positive way. That's a special duty towards them that I think provides the appropriate hook or basis for specifying the general duty of beneficence so as to apply here. So that's the picture of a privacy-based moral entanglement in this case, but I'm thinking in the other cases that I mentioned as well, that they're an unintended side effect of a accepted waiver of privacy rights, which, given that the duty to warn comes in to block silence, tactful silence, generates a special duty to help the person. All right, so I had some other sort of closing thoughts about how to generalize this back, but I think you can see sort of how, if I'm right, that this is the kind of thing that's going on in the case of medical researchers' ancillary care obligations. You just connect it back to the cases I gave of privacy-based moral entanglements and see how it would go. And so now, let me invite your questions and objections to the suggestion that it does go that way.
First, thank you.
Francis?
I have two questions. One is, does it matter why there's this privacy waiver? I mean, in one case, if it's for your own good to get the person to help you put the shopping, in the kitchen, as opposed to whether it's in the interest of the person who gets the, permission to then investigate. In the case of the doctor, it's usually that they want, okay? But sometimes in the case of some of the people who are research subjects, it's in their interest to be subjects just to have that part of the, the standard model, looking after the subjects. And so it seems to me that the duties that you might have would vary depending on whether it was originally solely in your interest to get the waiver or in the interest of the other person solely or combined to give the waiver. But the other thing, since you mentioned waivers, is, suppose I find out that if I am involved in a certain way with individuals in this normal relationship, I will get entangled and have these subsequent ancillary duties. That gives me a reason perhaps to avoid the original relationship, because I don't want to get entangled. And so far I haven't engaged with them that gives me any grounds for having a duty to, put myself in that situation. And the question then arises, I hate to use this phrase, but Pareto optimality. If they're worse off if I don't get involved at all, and they come to me and they say, I'm willing to release you from any ancillary duties. I waive any correlative rights I have to them. Please don't just not come. Okay? Yeah. So the question is whether this duty that you find is waiver, I shan't say it's that you're released from it by someone, the other party's waiver, or is it that it's completely independent of their waiver, and there's nothing that they can do to release you from it once you're in the situation. Because if there's nothing they can do to release you, unlike the privacy right that they can waive, okay, you may just want to avoid many of these situations if you're right about the degree of ancillary duty.
Yeah. Two great questions, Francis, and if I may begin with a somewhat ad hominem response. So I'm delighted but not surprised that you would see the potential for more finely discriminating among the cases than than anything I've said.
The private label is intricate.
Yes.
That's the trademark.
Yes. So, and I expect they would. I mean, since I've been mainly, I was driven into this by being focused on the medical research case, and I was sort of thinking that was tending to be a fortiori because the scientists solicit the waivers for their own purposes. Now, you're right that even within, as opposed to the old woman with the groceries, that's not the case. But so if you can see this kind of thing happening with the old woman in the grocery, I don't know, you may not share my intuition about that, but if you share the intuition that something of an obligation is arising in that case, then the case of the medical research would be stronger because the researchers have solicited the waivers for their own purposes. Now, you're right that there's variation within that category as to whether the subjects are benefiting and may have, lots of subjects are desperate, or lots of people are desperate to get into trials because they think it'll be their path to salvation, or cure their disease. And probably there would be variation with regard to that too. Some of that I lumped into the gratitude factor, so that would negate the scientist's gratitude to the subjects if the subjects are or feel they are getting, or are and feel they're getting a big benefit just from participating. The waiver question is practically very important. And we sort of, I think, largely negate the practical importance of what I'm saying if the researchers can just put it in the form there along with all the other stuff saying that I hereby waive my claim or release the researchers from any obligation with regard to ancillary care. Now you have a case of potential subjects saying, please, please, let me in and I won't ask you to do this, come to my locality. But before you get to such a case, I just want to say that, I do think that in principle, such claims are waivable. There's nothing inalienable about them. But that in many of the situations where these ancillary care obligations are important, so developing countries, there are moral reasons why the researchers ought not solicit these waivers of ancillary care claims, because basically it's a matter of non-ideal justice, that it's their terrible lack of medical care is a reflection of various levels of injustice that they're suffering, and one shouldn't try to get them to waive rights like this because it's going to worsen. Well, it's taking, sorry, it's not, I can't say it's going to worsen because you're pointing out, the kind of case, it's not always going to do that, but it's taking advantage of this injustice that they're in, getting them to do that. And then there's one other consideration with regard to the waiver. So I don't think it's impossible to waive these claims. But I think that there's a reason to be suspicious about it, or to think of there being a special kind of burden on the waivability, which has to do with this connection to fragile autonomy, if I'm right about it. That, for a waiver to be fully effective and proper, it should be autonomously made. But if one is being asked to say this is in its nature unknown, unexpected, so I'm saying, I realize that you might find some totally unexpected disease or medical problem that I have, and I'm going to waive in advance any claim that you help me with it. It's difficult for the person to anticipate the kind of impact on their conception of the good or their conception of themselves that this diagnosis may have. And so one has to be a little bit suspicious of the waiver.
But may I just say that you don't want to have higher standards for waiving the ancillary care duty than you originally had for waiving the privacy rights. Because if they're in unjust circumstances and would not ever have allowed researchers to examine them if they hadn't been in unjust circumstances, you'll also be taking advantage of their unjust circumstances and saying that they properly waived their privacy rights. So you've got to look at both of these waivers and not, and take into account the factors you hold against one against the other. That's all I'm saying.
Well, but no, well, in the first case, so if you're doing the trial morally acceptably, right, you're not imposing undue risks on them. I mean, so whereas the question of possibly withdrawing help is, yeah, the bigger negative for them. I mean, I think the different standards could apply. But Mary, I saw your hand.
Yeah. So these are cases where the initial interaction is either neutral or beneficial to the subject, and then everything follows after.
The research subject, right?
Yeah. Research subject. But I wonder whether there's something to be learned from thinking about a case where the initial interaction is positively harmful, and we actually have clearer senses of ancillary obligations. So, for example, if rather than going into a clinic or going into a nation and doing something good, you invade the nation, and you drop bombs on a group of soldiers and come in, then there's a whole bunch of ancillary obligations that you have in that case. People you would have been entitled to kill, you now have obligations to take care of. And so in the structure, I wonder whether that's a pretty well-developed set of intuitions about what the obligations in war or in that kind of context is. And I wonder how they might map back onto this, different context where the first interaction is created by this desire to help or this desire to do something independent of them, which is just scientific research.
Yeah, well, I sort of had a remark early on comparing moral entanglements to promises that philosophers are capable of making anything seem mysterious, but to make the duty of making amends for having unjustly harmed people, or are you talking about cases like you've in pursuing a just war,
it's a complete just war.
Damage?
Yeah, and I don't even talk about the innocents. Let's just talk about soldiers, right? You're in a just war, you commit an act, it harms a bunch of soldiers, you come across them, they're wounded, they need help. There would have been nothing unjust in having them die, but you've got a bunch of obligations.
I see, so that aspect of jus in bello, which would deal with the decent treatment of prisoners and wounded enemy.
Right, which are well articulated, right? I mean, there's in fact a bunch of stuff. But you began by saying this is an empty field, and I'm just wondering how empty the field is if you think about a parallel set of ancillary obligations, which seem to be quite well developed.
Well, so yeah, good. So what is the theory on that? I don't know the jus in bello stuff well enough to know what the account is. I mean, I know that there's consensus, and it's in Geneva Convention and everything. But so I take it that there's some specialness to that obligation that it's precisely because they're enemy soldiers that you captured that you may owe them more medical care, say, just take if they're wounded, than you would to, well, what, to civilians you pass along the way, or there's something special about the engagement with them, but I don't know if there's an accepted account of that. But this account is one I've given is specialized to the privacy waiver case, and I think this one's going to be very different. There's no rights waiver.
That's right.
Central to that. So I'm not claiming that the rights waiver model is going to. And as I said, friendship may be a model for recipient friendship model for a lot of them. Dan, sorry.
If you come back to the waiver issue, if you come back to the waiver issue, there is a very common condition for much medical research which does look like a waiver. Namely, consent forms will often say, if you're injured, there'll be no compensation for your injury. We'll treat you, but you won't be able to get compensation.
And NIH always says that. Yeah.
And that looks like a waiver too, because absent that, the trial lawyers would be in there pitching for you. So we do let that waiver be made. And if you think these are, the old view of research was it was bad for you, and so we had to protect you. And then the view sort of changed, in part for the AIDS, in the context of AIDS, when people were clamoring to get into the research. And so it became something that was viewed as often beneficial. And then we have to not protect you so much as make sure that you get a fair chance to get into it. And here, people are having to then give up a right they would otherwise have in order to get in the research, because there isn't an alternative consent form that says, oh, and yes, you can sue us if you get injured. So we do allow that waiver, not clear why we shouldn't allow the other one. In a way, that's a much more important waiver because it's probably more likely, at least in research in non-developing world contexts, that there'll be injuries in the research than there will be needs for ancillary care.
Yeah, good. Or if I just add one thing that bridges the two is the issue of malpractice when if ancillary care is provided. So when I was working on this stuff, I had a friend who was a major pharmaceutical company executive, and I ran it by him, and he said, well, you didn't really care about the first order ancillary care stuff. That's kind of peanuts, but but it was okay to have the view that there was such an obligation, as long as if they provided, they weren't liable for malpractice and anything that happened when providing. So that gets into serious money. But yeah, I mean,
Most injuries wouldn't be a result of malpractice.
No,
Would not be.
no. I mean, it's, in the research context, there's a lot of unpredictable things happening. So, but I just would need to rethink whether I would support that waiver. I mean, you're right, it's done. I mean, I only know through the NIH context. I know all NIH consent forms have that provision. But I already said that NIH said no funds are to be used for care not related to research, and I'm committed to that being
But if you take
wrong.
Partners Healthcare, they, in the consent forms they use, they have the same thing on there,
Okay.
prevented by
Yeah.
drugs.
I mean, they come, and you know, I have this reluctantly included balancing bit, so recognizing this, if you take this too far, it's just going to make the research impossible, and you don't want to even get close to making it impossible. You don't want to, I mean, you want it to be encouraging it, and so there's got to be some reasonable limits.
Question on what you just said. I mean, I would assume that waiver does not kick in if there is negligence on the part of the researchers.
I don't know the answer to your informational question.
I assume you're probably right, but I'm not a lawyer.
You can't wait.
But as against the government?
Well, it could be immunity against the government, but it's not negligence.
But again, most of it doesn't happen from negligence.
You get behind there?
Yeah, I had a question about why waiver was being built into the notion of privacy-based moral entanglements, because I can see some innocent entanglements where there's no waiver of the privacy interest that give rise to seemingly similar obligations.
Okay.
So suppose you just walk off the elevator on the wrong floor, and you open the door you think is your apartment's, which is unlocked, and you see the woman's kitchen. You see all the dishes, and you see the dangerous conditions. It's not obvious to me that just because she hasn't waived her privacy right by inviting you in, you have any weaker or even, I don't know if it's weaker or stronger obligations to warn her or to take some minimal steps to help her out. And it doesn't seem to be any more general, as in the case of the duty to rescue, than the one you described, the case you described.
Yeah, good. So, well, I'm deep, maybe too deep within my own theory. I certainly don't think it's going to be necessary to get entangled, that there be a privacy waiver involved. But let me try to make the case for a differential, sort of a degree difference. So take a high-powered litigator in two different circumstances. So one circumstance, he's on the airplane, just trying a big case, he's trying to rest and chill out, and then the person next to him won't stop talking, and he's he's trying not to listen, he's trying to tune him out, but the guy's going on, and the guy's describing a case he wants to litigate, and the litigator picks up from the facts given that the guy probably doesn't know it, but he really better get the matter to court in 3 days or the whole thing's going to disappear. He's going to lose his chance at any kind of compensation or collection in the court. So the question of whether you should say anything about it, and maybe, you know, maybe the answer is yes, but then compare that to the case where the same guy comes into the lawyer's office and puts the same matter before the lawyer, describes it, and then the lawyer says, you know, I'm too busy, I can't take your case, but has heard the matter in that kind of context where the information was invited because the appointment was accepted. And I just think there's a stronger case for the obligation in the latter case. Even if it's the same information, but in a situation where the guy said, yeah, okay, I'll listen to you. Arthur?
So, first of all, Henry, I think we can actually date the beginning of your interest in this was about 23 years ago when we did Spalding versus Zimmerman in the Ethics Center. So I've got two related questions. One is just to observe that often in anticipation of ancillary duties, we design institutions in order to make it physically impossible to do so. In a simply interpersonal case, we could either deliver aid or we can run for help. And we might run for help because once we run for help, then we're no longer on the scene to give more aid. In the experimental context, often genomic research is anonymized. And sometimes they say, well, we anonymize it for the purposes of keeping privacy. That's really not the reason. The reason we anonymize is so that we can't find the patient. We can't match up the file.
Yeah.
And so one question is, in anticipation of what would be triggered.
And we can make it no longer human subjects research.
That's what we're just experimenting on the DNA. So I mean, in anticipation, it's supposed to be by your entire apparatus. Is it permissible to set things up so that we don't trigger these? And here's a reason to think why it might be permissible, introducing an idea that was absent here and I was expecting to hear. So some idea of reasonable expectation or reliance. It has to be reasonable because often the patient or the person doesn't know what she doesn't know, so hasn't developed an expectation. But if you put yourself in the position of the person who you're helping, you might then spin out what a person would expect of you under the circumstances. This introduces, of course, some aspect of convention, which is probably a good idea, because all of a sudden shot through with the way that we do things that, in fact, may set up our expectations. So it's a double-down question. First, what do you think about preemptively setting things up so that you actually can't do the ancillary care? And is one of the reasons why you might be able to do that, because if you set things up like that, somehow you block a reasonable reliance or expectation, and that might drive some of the stuff.
Yeah, good. Yeah, great. So, I mean, one reason I think that this area, this medical research area, is not an area where there's a convention that might support these kind of obligations is that, let's say, no one thought about the area particularly. And so, and because of that, no one had talked about it, and no one had come up with any guidance on it. There isn't a set of reasonable expectations. And in fact, I mean, it's a very uncomfortable thing actually doing normative work in this area because nobody knows what is done. So my friend who was a top executive at a pharmaceutical company, asked him, what do your researchers do? We don't know. NIH doesn't have any overview of what its researchers do by way of ancillary care, partly because they're doing it partly sub rosa because of this Inspector General's constraint, but nobody keeps track of this. And I've actually talked to Peggy Hamburg at the FDA, who's a personal friend, to try to say, you know, in these data safety reports, couldn't you include something about this kind of thing? Because it fits within the categories of the kind of findings they collect that on. But any change, of course, to those kind of forms is a very costly and difficult thing to do. And just sort of parenthetically, it's an uncomfortable thing putting forward a normative standard with regard to an area like this where nobody knows what's actually done, because I don't know if I'm raising the bar or lowering it as far as that goes. But I do think researchers needs some guidance. And sorry, so double barrel. So as to the question of convention and the.
Is it okay to set things up so that?
Oh, sorry. Yes. So
physically impossible to.
Yeah. So I mean, my basic response to that is it may be permissible, but it's vicious. It's just it's not nice. It's like, I don't know. Getting yourself drunk at the beach, not because you like getting drunk, you actually hate getting drunk, but you really don't want to be called upon to rescue anybody. It's just, come on. You'd be willing to do your part. But I mean, it's a real issue. So I gather not so long ago, when researchers wanted a blood test, they would just ask for the blood panel, and they would get, things had gotten to a point where they could easily get, 50 results from a single blood test, even though they were only interested in 3 things. But then subsequent to that, things got more automated, and so they would just dial up the results they want so that, now metaphysically, I don't know exactly what the facts are, but the researchers would only get 3 of the possible kinds of results. And whether the machine knows the other results or not, I don't know, and I don't know if it matters. I mean, there's some great metaphysical questions here about the difference between, so just intuitively, the researchers seem to see a difference between doing a new test and reading a test you already did. And metaphysically, I have trouble telling the difference between them. But anyway, so one could, just design the machine so that it specializes in the malaria. It's just in Smyth's case, it only reacts to the malaria parasite and doesn't react to any of the other ones. And there might be good scientific reasons to do that. It just might make it a whole lot more efficient and cheaper to do the study. But if you're doing it in order to evade ancillary care responsibilities, I just think that's not nice.
Well, I'm a sociologist and empiricist, and so the first thing that I'd like to ask is, would it be interesting to find out what trialists really do and how they really do deal with subjects?
Yeah.
Because I think that would make quite a difference, and I think you'd find a number of the parts of the model aren't what actually happens. So if you want, I can put you in touch with a couple of people who are doing very fine-grained anthropological and sociological field studies of the actual interactions of recruiting subjects and negotiating with them through their trials and after their trials, including the various kinds of things they discover. My impression from talking with her name is Jill Fisher. She's a new appointment at Chapel Hill, but she's been doing this for some time, is that most pharmaceutical companies, and that's where a great deal of research goes on, 20 million people in trials in a given year, do not provide any care for ancillary things they come across. But the subjects think that they will. And further, the subjects think that they are likely to get the treatment to begin with. So some of the recruitment language, even from universities that I won't mention that are not in this city, but are of the same distinction, when you see their public ads, they say, feeling depressed, need help, we're doing a trial that might help you. Now, the key word is might.
Yeah.
Okay, they will be blindly assigned to one arm or another, and they might be helped, and they might not be helped, and even if they got the drug, they actually might be worse off rather than better off. So the key word is might, but it's misleading, it seems to me. Come on.
Yeah.
And then once they're a subject, there are very clear rules by the companies, and it seems to me those vary. And so one would want to look at those. And you won't find any of this by talking to executives. You have to talk
when I talk to the
field.
research people too, no, I mean, I'd love to get in touch with this person, and I'd want to put this person in touch with, there's a woman, Mariah Merritt at Hopkins, who's actually started to do some empirical research into what is done in ancillary care, the focus has been on a study in Nepal, a public health study in Nepal, actually Nepal newborn washing study. So doing this basic qualitative interview study and also survey study of what is done about this. And we need to know a lot more about this. The advertising pitch you cited and the expectations that are connected with it raise an issue which I haven't mentioned and people may be thinking of. So people in research talk about the so-called therapeutic misconception. And I remember, Arthur, talking to you about the therapeutic misconception, and you very rightly said that that is a misnomer insofar as the expectations are justified, and it's a question of whether they're justified or not. But it may result from just people confusing researchers with personal physicians. And if so, there may still be a justified basis for expecting some ancillary care, but it may not be the one that the people have in mind. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, so I do mean to invite conceptual people, philosophers to work more in this area, because I mean, I put out a view, and you've seen how lame it is, so you should be able to shoot it. But anyway, alternative and debate is needed. And I mean, guidance is needed in the end, but guidance is going to only result from a long conversation and public debate. But then to get anywhere towards any kind of practical guidance, there obviously has to be a huge amount more empirical understanding of what is happening than we have. Chuck, yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to kind of pursue this question about how the waiver matters, kind of just one more step, because I don't think this isn't an objection, I just don't think I understand the view. So, I mean, so the waiver could matter just in a kind of simple, in a non-normative way, just by explaining how it is that the subject got in the position of that they're in, how they got to be a subject, and how it came to be that this information about them became available to the researchers. But I think you think it matters in a different way, in that the waiver actually explains the content of the obligation, or a part of the content of the obligation that the researcher might have if they discovered the person had some kind of ancillary care. So that's what I don't quite understand, because when I look back at the diagram you had, it seemed as if this general duty of beneficence and the duty to warn were doing the work and explaining what it is that the researcher owed to the subject. So I guess I'm really just asking you to maybe fill in a little bit more about how it is that the waiver of the privacy rights matters morally.
Good. Yes, thank you. So, so partly, as I said, the view is the partial entrustment view, as I initially said it, articulated, and now I'm trying to give a proper philosophical account of, was from the beginning trying to explain what seems intuitively to be a special obligation that researchers owe their participants. Okay, and so the contrast with the what you see with the naked eye stuff, which the objection from Dickert and Wendler made salient, so is important to me, and it's important to me not just in their case. Well, so you can have a participant and you can see things in the naked eye in them and find out about them not by doing study procedures. But you can also, as you're walking through the local market, you can see those same things in people who are not your participants. So I've been focused on what difference morally does it make to be within this relationship between researcher and subject. And Dickert and Wendler say it's just the fact of relationship. Well, that's just too vague. So what is it about the relationship? And I'm focusing on this moral transaction. And not so much, well, yeah, so it gives the content of the scope, or it sets the limits of the scope. So but that's a byproduct of it being the basis of the existence of the obligation. So why is there this special obligation? It's because of the special responsibilities transferred to the researcher during this, or by this acceptance of the waiver of privacy rights. There wouldn't be that obligation. But I mean, I don't know if that helps. I mean, why does it do that? But and then I had the story that I used the quick parallel to lending the car about why a rights waiver might have that effect. So we, but
One more question. I think I saw Kate.
yes, Kate.
Okay, one thing that I think hasn't been noticed yet is the issue of control groups.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me, if we, okay, particularly in cases where a rationale for participating in a study is at least the possibility of benefit, as with, say, the HIV vaccine things. And you know that the control group is getting no benefit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's built in. So would that actually suggest you have a stronger duty for ancillary care since they're not getting any direct benefit from this at all? I mean, it seems to me very problematic to have what seems like a rather weak duty of ancillary care if it's not too expensive, and then worry about the control groups who are getting nothing from this.
Well, so the duty weaker, the claim was that the duty can be stronger than rescue, but it has its limits, but it applies equally to the control people. So there's the case, so in the special case of HIV vaccine trials, idealizing or simplifying, you're only finding out one thing about them, I guess, which triggers an ancillary care obligation, which is they become HIV positive. But that is a big deal, and it seems a basis in itself for worrying more about. There was no suggestion that the ancillary care claim applies differently to the control people who become HIV.
I know that, and that's what I'm worried about.
Oh, why should it?
Because basically, if there's at least a potential benefit, if I'm in the experimental group, there's some good to me that I can stand to get directly.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm in the control group, there is no good to me that I stand to get directly.
There's potential harm, which we control group.
Can I just break in? It's supposed to be double-blinded, in which case you don't know and the experimenter doesn't know either, and therefore it's not possible.
Then maybe I think that the ancillary care duty goes up for everybody, because I think it has to be reasonably high for the controls who do not stand to get any direct benefit. And maybe, it looks the way...
There's also an ex-ante, ex-post kind of difference. Ex-ante, you don't know whether you're going to be a control or not. So you could look at it ex-ante and there shouldn't be, so there better not be, an ex-ante net serious risk. Of course, there's going to be a distribution of risks and benefits. And then I think we would need Francis to help us sort out the ex-ante, ex-post differences between, if you disaggregate between those two possibilities of taking that into account. But I'm not going to try at this point. But thank you.
Before we thank Professor Richardson for this lecture, he mentioned he's a reflective equilibrium theorist. The center does the tick-tock of reflective equilibrium. So we have next up on November 8th and 9th, Congressman Sarbanes, who will be talking about his Grassroots Democracy Act. And that will be a 2-day series with a lecture, and the following day having a panel discussion. So that will be our talk before the next tick. And insofar as this has been a treatment for all of us, I think it was met with not tactful silence, but tactful engagement. So we thank you for that.